Hello, welcome to Exotic Gardening UK, Yorkshire Kris Weekly, and in this week's episode we'll be talking about gardening during a hosepipe ban. Basically, we'll talk about the hosepipe ban and how we can deal with that and carry on gardening and growing plants successfully. And we've not had a hosepipe ban here in Yorkshire for 25 years. It's been a long time since we've had full restrictions. Basically what a hosepipe ban means is you cannot use main water to do anything in your garden or house using a hosepipe. So you can't connect a hosepipe to the main water and use it for watering the garden, cleaning your car, or using a pressure washer or anything like that. So you can't do any of those activities, and there's a full list on the Yorkshire Water and other websites where there's hosepipe restrictions in place. But you still can do a few things with a hosepipe. It's not fully restricted. There's certain exemptions which we'll talk about a bit later. So how do you water your garden if you've got a hosepipe ban? Well, you basically are going to have to use a watering can in most cases. So it will mean you can't water everything as thoroughly without spending much longer watering. So we're going to look at the garden, we're going to look at what plants need the most water, so we'll concentrate on those, and also look at things like how we can get around the water hosepipe ban in some respects, and also plan again for the future to grow more drought tolerant plants that don't need as much water. So why have we got the hosepipe ban in the first place? Well, basically, as you've probably noticed, it's been very, very dry all year. And in fact, we've had below average rainfall since December 2021. So we've had over a year of, December 2020, I believe it was, over a year of below average rainfall. So it has been very dry for a very long time. The river levels, the reservoir levels are very low, and it means that they've decided to put water restrictions in place, including hosepipe bans. Obviously, there's ways this could be mitigated in the long term if they've actually built more reservoirs in the future to cope with demand, which would be the main thing, and obviously fixing leaks as well. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how we can garden during the hosepipe ban. So there are some restrictions. Obviously, you can't use that hosepipe to water your garden unless that water source isn't from the mains. So if you've got a siphon, or you've got some pump from water butts, if you've got your own well or borehole in the garden, or your own supply coming through your garden, you are allowed to use a hosepipe from that. You're just not allowed to use it from the mains. You can also use grey water, so some water from baths and sinks you can use in the garden, although I don't like doing that because it depends obviously what you've used in terms of washing liquids, detergents, if you've used bleach to go down and clean your pipes and things like that, and then if that's been used, then obviously you don't want that used on your plants a lot of the time. So it's alright an occasional time, but not over and over for a long period of time. But you can set up grey water systems to filter that as well. Another restriction, and this is a big one which will affect a lot of people that people don't realise, is an exemption should I say, is the fact that if you're a blue badge holder and disabled, you don't have to be carrying heavy watering cans. You can still use your hosepipe in most areas. That doesn't mean that everybody in a household without a blue badge can use a hosepipe. It's only the person who is classed as disabled, has a blue badge, can use a hosepipe for mobility issues and weight and things like that. So that's one of the exemptions. If you grow fruit and veg, produce that you're going to eat, then you can carry on watering that with a hosepipe as well. So if you grow things obviously like tomatoes and vegetables, strawberries and things like that, you can carry on using a hosepipe as well. And if you have a pond with livestock, if you've got fish in, then you can top up your ponds. But you can't just top up a pond which don't have any fish in, or top up a hot tub or a paddling pool or anything like that. So we're going to look at some things in the garden. We're going to look at some of the plants that need a lot of water, and we're going to look at the ones which don't need too much as well. And then we're going to look at an interesting exemption that I need and will be using in my garden, which is micro irrigation. So here we are in the arid area of my garden where I grow yuccas, agaves, cacti and some more drought tolerant looking palms, such as the beautiful blue fan palm here, this Briar armata. And these plants will tolerate months and months without any water, so hosepipe bans means nothing to them. They'll get enough moisture from the ground, from the occasional rainfall we'll get, and you don't need to water these at all throughout the year, so these are totally fine. And there's other plants as well that go along with this, some flowering plants as well that will, Mediterranean style plants and arid plants that will cope without any additional irrigation or watering at all in the UK. So plants like this are not affected by the hosepipe ban. Obviously, if you're just getting a new plant, even an arid style planting, and you're planting it out, it's best to give it a good watering, which obviously you can do with a watering can as a one-off. But apart from that, it doesn't need any extra watering. It'll go months and months, like I said, without any extra water. So perhaps in the future, if we want to think about sort of growing more without having to water too much, then growing this style of planting might be the way to go. So the area of the garden I'm in now has all the big luscious leaves, very fleshy stems and leaves, things like the bananas here. We've got the gingers as well. We've got the sort of bedding things, we've got the dahlias, we've got the cannas as well. And these things do need a lot of water to keep going and growing well. Obviously with the hosepipe restrictions, it means you can't put the hosepipe down to water these, but you can use a watering can, and these are the sort of the plants that I will concentrate on to keep them nice and moist with the hosepipe, with the watering can. One thing you can do to mitigate actually needing to use too much water is actually using good heavy soil when you plant these out. So if you have a nice clay, nice loam, add loads of organic material at planting time and before to really bulk up the availability of moisture in that soil to give to the plants, and then use a nice heavy mulch as well. So I use bamboo leaves now, I use bark chippings as well, and some old compost over the ground when I planted plants out. Once I've watered in really well in spring, put that mulch down, and that really does suppress weeds and holds onto loads and loads of moisture that these plants need. So it's about planning ahead. So if you think about we might get hosepipe restrictions in the future, and it's just good sort of housekeeping really is to mulch your beds, especially around the plants that need lots and lots of moisture. Now, of course, established plants that have had their roots in the ground for years, many years, will be fine with restrictions to their water because they will have got their roots in and they will be getting moisture from deeper down in the ground. So in the bed behind me, we've got various things. We have got a yucca, which is totally fine without the extra moisture anyway, but we have got a beautiful Bootia erispatha palm as well. This does like lots of moisture to grow really well. It can cope with drought to some extent because it's got nice deep roots and it's nice and established. We've got plants like this Trachycarpus, again that likes moisture and doesn't like to be too hot, but because it's established, got its roots down, it will be fine without any extra watering. So I won't be using a watering can on this bed at all because it'll be fine for several months without extra water. And in fact, this bed, I've probably watered it 3 or 4 times this year anyway because it has been so warm. I've watered those. Sometimes I never water this bed at all. So if you've got established plants in the garden, been in for years, it's very unlikely you need to water those. You really need to concentrate on pots and planters and those really sort of greedy, moisture loving plants. So even plants that like lots of water, like the colocasias, they will not die even in drought conditions. What will happen is, yes, they will maybe get crisp up the leaves. They may actually stop producing leaves and in extreme cases lose the leaves. But the actual growing part under the ground, the bulb area of it, basically will survive, and it doesn't matter because in a lot of these places where they live naturally, native habitat, they will have drought periods where they'll lose all the foliage and they'll come back from the ground. So it's not the end of the world if you can't water all your plants. Most of them have got coping mechanisms to make sure they don't actually die out, and that's true even for gingers and dahlias because they've got that fleshy rhizome under the ground. You might might lose the foliage and the flowers, but under the ground, you've still got the plant alive to come back next year if you forget to water it for whatever reason, including in pots. Now here's some plants that are not affected at all by the hosepipe ban, and that is the carnivorous plants like these pitch plants, and there's also Venus flytraps amongst there as well. And these are affected because these don't use mains water, they need rainwater. So the water for these come from water butts, so these carry on basically watering them from the water butt. Obviously be mindful if you are using your rainfall water collected in a water buck for the rest of the garden during the hosepipe ban. Make sure you leave some water for carnivorous plants, because that is what they do rely on. Now if you've got lots of potted plants, they're the plants you really need to concentrate on watering, and obviously without the hosepipe, watering can is going to be the main way. So keep those pots close to the house, so you're not having to travel far from the outside tap to actually water those containers, and that's an easy way of keeping your plants watered without having to lug out that watering can all over the garden, even if there isn't a hosepipe ban. And also think about putting plants in the shade. So here we have a selection of plants like this party time. We've got a brugmansia here. We've got some other little plants such as these colocasias that need quite a lot of moisture, but I've put them into the shade, which will reduce the water loss on these plants as well. It won't harm them in the short term. Yes, it will reduce the chances of them growing big and flowering in the case of the brugmansia, but it will reduce water loss quite considerably, especially if it's out of the wind as well. So if it's in the shade, it doesn't get too hot and there's less evaporation and less water use from the plants transpiring as well. So that's just another tip you might want to think about. And obviously some plants like the shade all the time, so we have got a nice begonia over there that are keeping the shade, and I'll be keeping it watered with the watering can. So we've talked about a few exemptions, and the next one I'm going to mention is pretty much a big one, and one that's sort of going to save me a lot of time watering during the hosepipe ban, and that is the use of micro irrigation mini drippers, mini sprayers, which have a valve to limit the pressure. And that is a system I use to water my tree ferns. So I've got irrigation pipes going around the garden, and feeding off from that, there's individual little plastic tubes that go up the trunks of the tree ferns, and a little dripper in each one at the top allows the water to percolate down the trunk and water it that way. And I have checked with Yorkshire Water, and it's completely fine to do this on this setup with the valve and the targeted drippers. It's totally fine to use. So you could have a full setup in your garden, watering different areas targeted this way. Makes really good use if you're doing sort of pots and also hanging baskets where you can put the individual little drippers in as well. So it doesn't apply to like random big spray arms or soak hose or anything like that. It has to be targeted micro irrigation. I've got that in writing that it's fine to do so, but do check with your local water authority to make sure it's fine in your area, because there might be some discrepancies in different areas. But this will save a lot of time for me watering the tree ferns rather than using the watering can. So I'm very happy that you can still continue to water in this way. And finally, let's think about the fact that the hosepipe ban is coming late in the year this year, and it means probably going to get a lot of rain anyway as we move through September and October. And even if we don't, if we look at the plants behind us, they've already grown to their full height and potential pretty much for the season, and watering is basically at this time of year keeping them alive at this size rather than to grow bigger. So it's not the end of the world. We've looked at various ways we can sort of reduce water and water our plants as well, by mulching, using micro irrigation, and using plants that don't need a lot of water. So all those things will help if we've got further hosepipe bans in the future. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week where we'll be doing more in the garden.